Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Tonight, we'll explore a rarely mentioned Roman profession, the ancient craft of mouse fur sewing. From an anonymous seamster living in Subura, 1st century AD, the supply chain started with the Muscarius, the organized level rat hunter. There were rat farms and even breeding mice. The price of mice varied by season, color, and degree of rot. There were even rare mice to be sewn into garments for noblewomen of Rome. Mice were soaked in a mixture of sour vinegar, old urine, and warm ash. A spectacle full of stench and bubbling noises that haunt the night. Before we begin, if you truly find this to be a soothing corner for late-night refuge, hit like and subscribe, but only if you really want to, no pressure. Just like the rules in ancient taverns, only if you need a place for silence. And you know what I love most? It's looking at the comments and seeing where you're from and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m., you're still here. And I see you. Now turn off the lights and turn on a small fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for the soft humming sound. Good morning, Roman mouse fur seamster. You open your eyes. Not because of the light. Subura's winter skies are as dark as Nero's inner thoughts when hungry, but because of the smell. The overwhelming reek of sour vinegar mixed with rotten meat and dampness from a dirt floor that hasn't dried yet. Not everyone gets woken by the smell of freshly baked bread. You get called out of sleep by the scent of mouse carcasses soaked for 3 days. You sit up, your head still spinning, your nose still not recovered. The blanket wrapped around you is really just an old goat skin with holes cut into it. And in the corner, there's still a bit of mouse fur left over from yesterday's batch. The room has no windows, just one ventilation slot, enough for a breeze to slip through, and the sound of Subura roosters arguing echoing from the neighboring buildings. To your right is a wash basin, now green with moss. To your left is the pile of mouse corpses you received last night, still wet, still soft, and if you don't get to them soon, the flies will. You are a mouse fur seamster, not a slave, but not much better either. Not poor enough to be given charity, not rich enough to afford the product you make, and definitely not reckless enough to quit. Because no one in this job survives long enough to retire. Outside, Rome is waking up. The sound of wooden carts grinding on stone. Men cursing each other in Greek-Latin hybrid. The vegetable vendor yelling, "Buy now, or the rats will beat you to it." But inside this tiny room, there's only the sound of your sneezing from fur up your nose, and the scratch of your fingernail over the fresh rash blooming on your right wrist. The result of soaking your hands too long in goat urine mixed with warm ash. You sigh, then walk to the corner where rat corpses hang like a tragic stage curtain. Each rat is tied by a tiny rope, head bowed, legs still stiff. The most impatient one is probably you, not the rats. You pull one off the line, but before you stitch, you have to verify its origin because in Subura, there once existed a black market of counterfeit rats, where fur was dyed using cheap fabric dye to mimic sacred temple stock. A gang of rat-thieving boys, nicknamed Rat Boys, were once hunted across public bathhouses after swapping 12 temple rats for sewer rats. A priest once wore a ceremonial robe made of fake rat fur and got struck by lightning mid-ritual. People said it was a sign from the gods, but it might just have been static from synthetic fur. The hide is now soft, the eyes sunken, the smell just ripe enough. You flip it over gently and see a tiny label stuck to the tail. Mus albus, white type, express delivery. This type is for wealthy ladies, not because they like mice, but because they like the idea that their mice are cleaner than others. Even rats in Rome had social classes. Rats caught near the Temple of Vesta were considered sacred, with divine energy, often used for headdresses or ear covers for noble women during lucky rituals. Meanwhile, rats from the Cloaca Maxima sewers were called battle-worn water rats, meant for workers or soldiers. One record noted that a noblewoman once sued a seamstress after discovering the fur on her coat came from the market, not the temple, leading to a scandal recorded in local annals as Scandalus Rodentus, not because they like mice, but because they like the idea that their mice are cleaner than others. Historical note: Rome once had laws banning mousekeeping, but not the trade of their reusable parts, especially fur. Some Augustus-era documents even recorded rat skin being used to line winter gloves for soldiers posted on the northern front. Subura's workshops typically receive stock from professional rat hunters, known as muscarius, and processed fur by soaking it in urine mixed with hot ash to soften it. That's not folklore, that's a real production line. You begin working, no face washing, no breakfast. Breakfast is just the ammonia-laced air and a few mental spells to keep your mind from falling into the truth. Veteran seamsters have described a condition called musophrenia, a mild psychological disorder caused by prolonged exposure to rat feces, urine, and burnt fur. Some began hallucinating, rat speaking, or fur crawling backward into their ears. Some fell in love with a stuffed rat they'd sewn, gave it a name, talked to it nightly. In the year 53 before the Common Era, a senator proposed a bill requiring regular psychiatric evaluations for fur workers, but it was dismissed because no one could bear to look into their eyes long enough to question them. The truth is, you are sewing rat corpses to keep warm someone who doesn't know you exist. While your hands crack, your nose numbs, and your heart still feels. That sucks. Glorious Rome is out there. And you are at your most glorious when a hat holds its seam. Each day starts with the smell of dead rats and hopes to end with a bowl of thin porridge not flavoured with stray fur. Wishing you a lucky day. If you're still alive by nightfall, you can reward yourself with a dreamless sleep, or at the very least, one day where you don't mistake burnt rat hair for your own. You think only slave trading, wine trading, or grain dealing were the real money makers in Rome. Oh no. Step into Subura, Rome's slum in the most literal sense, and ask any random person, I need 40 mice, smooth-skinned, not stiff yet, tails intact. You'll see them nod, pull down a cloth curtain, and take you into the underground rat market, a place Rome prefers to forget, but noble women place orders as regularly as Rome collects taxes. Some archaeological records from Pompeii have noted ceremonial item lists that included white mouse skins, used to wrap sacred bones or line jewelry boxes. In Pliny, the Elders' Library, there's a note that reads, white mice from the Temple of Vesta, if skinned fresh, can retain softness for up to 10 years when soaked in ash and goat urine. These types of mice were often hunted by specially trained slaves, and some rat merchants were even tax exempt because of their contribution to sacred rituals. In this trade, there's no such thing as an ordinary mouse. There's a full ranking system, like gladiator rankings, just no one cheers when the mouse enters the arena. Mus niger, black mouse, small body, coarse fur, but tough as tax law. Used to line gloves, the kind slaves usually wear, so no one cared if they caused allergies. Mus albus, white mouse, rare, noble, 5 times more expensive. Soft, light fur, can fool even the empress's eyes if stitched carefully. Some claim it's edible. No one dares verify. Mus flavus, light yellow mouse. Special fur, only grows around goat pens. Fur smells like, if you're used to it, it's fragrant. If not, you'll vomit. Used by priests to wipe down statues of gods. Why? No one dares ask. Some healing rituals at temples of Asclepius used live mice, placed on wounds or painful areas to absorb evil spirits. When the mouse died or ran away, people believed the illness was taken away too. Some would then skin that very mouse and keep the fur as a protective charm, making the spiritual rat fur market especially attractive to the gravely ill. No one's sure if it works, but everyone's willing to try. In Materia Medica, by Dioscorides, a Greek herbalist in the 1st century, there's a remedy made from rat ash mixed with goat fat, applied to the scalp to treat patchy hair loss. No one dares ask whose head he tested it on. But apparently, not many people stayed bald long enough to complain. They crawled into crevices even slaves hesitated to enter. Covered in lice, scabies, and sometimes missing a bit of ear. But if lucky, they'd catch 12 in one night. Each mouse sold for 2 sestertii. If alive, double the price. That's 3 times the salary of a philosophy teacher, but a shorter lifespan than stale bread. Once caught, the mice were handed off to little boys in charge of delivery. Romans didn't send kids to school, but they did make them carry baskets of live mice across public squares, because nature will teach them how to grow up fast or die trying. Mice were packed into wooden crates lined with straw and ash, not to keep them warm, but to stop the smell from escaping too early. No one wants to open the lid and find the mouse has turned to soup. The rat crates were delivered to workshops like yours. Every morning, a nameless man comes with a small notebook reading. Today, 25 black, 8 white, 3 yellow, 1 tail less. Then he disappears like the rat trade is some underground society, which it kind of is. Remember that mouse fur hat you stitched last month? It was sold to a noble woman in Aventine for a price that could feed you meat pies for 3 months. Well, what did you get? 1 bronze coin, a piece of stale bread, and a decree. A good craftsman is an anonymous one, because if you get famous, who will do the work? The mouse dies, you live, and the person wearing that mouse fur coat never guessed someone had picked off every flea from each strand of fur. There's a saying in Subura, if your hat is warm, someone else is definitely smelling rats for you. A document by Quintus Varro, 27 years before the birth of Christ, once mentioned a group of runaway slaves who opened their own mouse-stitching shop on the outskirts of Rome, specializing in hats for border guards. No one remembers their names, but many Roman soldier helmets found later in Britain showed signs of rat fur, with secret codes stitched in black thread reading, "We survived." Some modern scholars now believe the rat trade once served as a cover for an escaped slave network, an underground railroad of ancient Rome. The underground rat market still exists, sneaking through the city like the animals themselves. And though the Roman Senate never recorded it officially, it remained an industry that kept hundreds of seamsters alive and thousands of mice. Not. You wake up to the creaking of wood at the door. Not a love letter, not a wine delivery, but a wooden crate bigger than the trust you have left in this job. You know what's inside, and the smell confirms it before your eyes even open. From De Re Rustica, by Columella, a Roman agricultural author in the 1st century. People used to transport birds, squirrels, and rabbits alive in wooden baskets lined with ash and dried herbs to reduce odor and prevent decay. The business of transporting small animals isn't new. It's just rarely discussed because its smell always speaks first. The wooden crate you're smelling has ash in it too. The only difference is that there's nothing alive in there anymore. It's the smell of ash mixed with urine, the smell of skin not yet dried and nails not yet fallen off, the kind of smell that can only be described as a rat still trying to escape even though it's already dead. You roll up your sleeves and pull out the wooden latch. The lid opens silently, but the smell is anything but. It pours out like an unsatisfied soul, wrapping your face, your eyes, and your mood. You're used to it. Just a slight grimace left, like how someone frowns when it rains during their wedding. Inside are 33 rat corpses, 3 yellow, 9 white, 21 black. 2 look like old classmates, or at least like they had lives once. 1 is still twitching. You set it aside, not to save it, but to wait for it to pick a side, life or death. Because sewing a live rat is something that only happens once in a career, and in a nightmare. You start sorting, not by weight, but by hand and nose. A receipt found in Pompeii clearly states, Muspilius, duo, 3 as, meaning 2 rat skin hats, 3 as coins. This proves the trade was not only real, but also logged, priced, and possibly tax deductible. The hat you stitched last month, the one that made the noblewoman scratch her head endlessly, may have been a fashionable copy of something once openly sold in Pompeii. This one is still soft. That one's stiff like a statue of the gods. This one, damp. Could be water, or maybe it wet itself. You've learned to feel the tension in muscle, the stretch of skin, the snap of a tail, like a baker feels dough. Only difference is, if you mess up, it's not a flat cake, but a hat being accused of impurity. Any rat that gets chosen is gently shaken. You have to shake fleas off without losing fur. There's a specific technique: soft shake, quick soak, slow dry. No one taught you that. You learn by being bitten. And anything that doesn't bite you becomes knowledge. A good day is a low smell day. A bad day is when rats were fermented wrong, and you have to stitch them while their guts are still quietly leaking. You've washed your hands in wine mixed with ash. You've worn a goatskin apron soaked in 10 generations of rat. You've sat alone at noon and wondered, if I die, will someone sort me by hand too? One time, you received a crate with an unexpected guest, a weasel, not a rat. Not in the order. You kept it. not because it was beautiful, but because it was the first thing that didn't make you feel like you were rotting from the inside out. There's a saying in the trade that only those who've smelled over 1,000 rats understand. Not everyone deserves to live, but everyone feared death. You don't know why you thought of that at 5 a.m., holding a rat tail, but you remember smiling slightly and continuing to pluck the last bit of fur from the box, as if it was the most sacred thing left you could do in this life. You think the job ends at sorting? No, because next comes bathing the rats, which means cleaning dead bodies, a task that feels both unnecessary and painfully human. You prepare 2 basins, one cold to wake up the skin, one warm to soothe the fur, and 1 jar of special mixture, ash, salt, sour vinegar, and boiled water from wilted bay leaves, not because the recipe works. In fact, the ancient Romans even used fermented urine as detergent, smelly enough to make Jupiter wince. Under Emperor Vespasian, it was taxed and collected in jars across the streets. You once tried replacing vinegar with that folk detergent. Result, the rat skin shriveled like soggy crackers, and you passed out from the smell. Of history, no one spoke to you for 2 days after. But this mixture has been passed down through 3 generations of people with questionable noses. You dip each rat into the water, no rush, no roughness, because even if it's just a rat, it deserves to be clean one last time, even if it's only going to end up on a Roman noble's head without making them gag at a banquet. Pliny the Elder once wrote that clean animal fur can absorb scent better, and was used to retain perfume on noble bodies longer. That makes you, the one scrubbing rat bellies, the first link in a chain of elite seduction. The water turns colour like cheap wine poured into mud. You scoop one out. It's as soft as unbaked bread. You stroke its fur in the direction it grows, not to style it, but to check if any skin is torn deep enough to reveal memories. You once asked an old dyer, "Is there a colour that can hide the smell of rot?" He laughed and answered, "Only the colour of tears." When drying, you hang each by the tail on a rope, like drying raisins. No one sees this as strange, because in Rome, anything can become merchandise, if dried properly. One day, you tried using Greek soap, smelled like a sweet lie. You thought it would make the rat corpses cleaner and fancier, but the result was rat skin turned mushy, and you were scolded for washing the soul out of the product. In a medical text by Galen, he wrote that small animal corpses should be air-dried naturally to retain structural integrity, unless you want to cause fermented rot. You don't know what that is, but you're sure you've seen it. So you went back to the classic mixture: ash, salt, sour vinegar. A Roman medical document once warned, the mix of vinegar and ash can cause blistering on the skin when used repeatedly, especially if you're the only one in the workshop not wearing gloves, because gloves haven't been invented yet. You once lost your fingerprints for 3 days, but on the plus side, no one could identify you when the batch was returned for weird smell, the smell of consistency, the smell of resignation, the smell of someone who knows some things are not meant to be reinvented. Each rat, after being bathed, is placed on a clean linen cloth, not because the rat needs it, but because you need to remember you still have humanity. You once dreamt of a rat opening its mouth to say, "Please, at least shampoo me before skinning." You woke up in the middle of the night not out of fear, but because you actually did shampoo it, very gently. You used to think skinning was the cruelest part of this job. You were wrong. Cruelty begins the moment your hands get used to it. That first incision always gives you a shiver, not because of blood, the rat's already dead, but because of that weird sound, like peeling a wet piece of paper off a wooden table, a tiny rip that goes straight to the heart. You use a thin blade, sharpened from cowbone, to make the cut along the spine. Some tanners in Rome used to say the best skinning blades were made from reclaimed steel, taken from Carthaginian war spoils. They claimed that if a knife could slice an elephant's throat, it could skin a rat like silk. You've never met an elephant, just rats, and a few torn ears from blades that were too sharp, not too deep, not too rough. One time, you tore off a rat's ear mid-skin. Panicked, you stitched it onto another rat. No one noticed, until it looked like it was listening with 3 ears. The whole workshop laughed. You got a new nickname, Father of Frankenstein Rats, because one wrong tear, and all that washing effort goes straight down a Roman sewer. Your fingers used to have fingerprints, used to feel flour, or the hair of someone you loved. Now, they're thick, calloused, numb like the paving stones of the Appian Way, just sensitive enough to register the lack of sensation. The challenge isn't in the technique. The challenge is not looking into the dead rat's eyes. Before skinning, a fellow tanner once taught you to draw a small X on the rat's forehead with ash, a little ritual he called letting it rest. You did it a few times, then stopped, because ash made your grip slip, and you sliced both skin and nail. You know there's no soul left in it. But sometimes, in a pile of 100 little corpses, you catch one stare so vacant it makes your hands pause. "What are you looking at?" you once muttered, then bowed your head and got back to work, because no one pays for hesitation. One day, your master said, "Go easy. The skin has to stay soft enough for gold thread." You almost laughed, not at the lesson, but at the idea of using rats as the foundation for something as fancy as gold. But you knew it was true. You'd seen a senator's drunken head wearing a rat fur cap studded with gems, and you'd thought, your head is wearing a corpse, and still held high. The Romans had a way to test skin dryness with the tongue. If it sticks slightly, still damp. If it slides, ready for tanning. You tried it once, lost your sense of taste for 3 days, but got 3 unpaid days off. You called it your rat toxin vacation. Once skinned, you air dry the pelts in the shade, not to fade them, not to rot them, not to have them mistaken for trash. In Alexandria, a rat skinner once saved his prettiest pelts, stitched them into a scroll, and wrote a love poem for someone he adored. They rejected it, but the poem survived, stored in a small wooden box in Herculaneum, later misused as wartime emergency toilet paper. Animal skins reflect how the living treat the dead. You don't remember who said that, just that it echoes every time you fold a rat's pelt into a neat stack, like love letters no one will ever read. You once tried counting the rats you'd skinned. By number 257, you gave up, because every time you slit down a spine, you think of yourself also being peeled away from everything that used to be soft and warm. You used to think drying hides was the easiest part, just sunlight and a piece of string. No, you're hanging history on a rope, and history never dries evenly. It begins at dawn, when the sun is still yawning. You head to the yard with a bucket full of rat skins, wet, cold, and smelling like if cheese could die. You shake out each one, lightly, evenly, remembering what an old tanner in Ostia once said: hang hides facing east and they smell sweet, west and the soul wanders. Your buddy once hung them west, just to spite the sun god, and the whole batch turned a weird purplish brown. Unexpectedly, they sold like crazy, rumored to be dyed by Apollo's wrath, like your soothing tiny souls that escape their bodies. Some old tanners call it a farewell ritual without incense. The drying rope is stretched from a brick wall to a stone pillar, sometimes looped through the bust of Bacchus. They say Bacchus blesses hides to dry evenly, as long as you don't hang the wrong side out. One time you forgot, and the skin shriveled like an orange peel. You kept it as a reminder. Even gods have taste. In a buried workshop in Pompeii, archaeologists once found a drying line with scraps of half-dried ash-stained rat hide still hanging. One piece had these words carved into it: "This is not your skin, it's mine." Scholars still argue, was it a confession, a curse, or an unsent poem? Even gods have taste. Some sunny days, skins dry in just a few hours. Other days, the wind blows sideways and skins take off. You once saw a piece of rat hide fly straight into a noblewoman's hair. She screamed like Julius Caesar had insulted her. You got slapped. The hide got stuck in her mink hat all market long. You learned to pin stones to the bottom of the ropes to stop rat reincarnation. Still, a Sabura tannery took it further. They hung tiny bells beside each skin. So if there was a jingle, it was either wind or something coming back. Locals called it the vengeance line, because some rats weren't fully dead. They wriggled on the rope as if apologizing for dying wrong. Your master said, "Rehang it. Nobody wants expressive hides." You lined them up like love letters on a clothesline. One time you tried soaking them in lavender oil. Nice idea. Reduce stink, raise price. Result: the hides softened like pastries, and an army of stray cats arrived, howling like they demanded the right to nap on the past. You hung extra time to drive them off. Didn't work. You ended up posting a sign at your door: "Not for cats, and not for anyone who trusts lavender." Sometimes at dusk, you watch sunlight pass through the skins, like it's slicing through time, illuminating stains you can't scrub out. Once, you secretly twisted each hide into spirals, hoping it'd dry faster. Result: the whole line turned into a chain of giant rat sausages. The neighbor kids begged to play ring toss with them. You quietly took them down and rehung them the old-fashioned way, like every generation before you did. They cast tiny shadows on the ground, like souls searching for their way back. An old tanner once said, "When hides dry, memories solidify." You didn't understand until you saw a tiny rat bite still imprinted on one skin, and remembered the first rat you ever kept, not to kill, but to hear the tiny nighttime gnawing. A customer once asked, "Doing this job, doesn't it haunt you?" You looked at the pile of dried hides, those thin brown strips swaying gently in the wind. You said, "It used to. But now, I just hope for sun." Some people think the worst part is the killing. Some say it's the skinning. You know better. Nothing is more horrifying than brushing. This is when you pick up each dry rat hide, stretched thin like a childhood memory, and have to remove every last bit of fur still clinging. Not with bare hands, no way. You use a special comb, teeth sharp as a royal cat's claw, handle made from oak struck by lightning. People say it carries spirit. And then you pull. The sound goes shh shh over and over, like a cat being passive-aggressive, like the haunting rhythm in a dream of someone who's worked too long. Like history, refusing to let go. You brush against the grain, against the wind, against logic, against your master's advice. Brush with the grain, it's beautiful. Against the grain, you'll never forget. You once tried a comb made of bone, something ancient Romans believed would ease shedding thanks to the hardened soul of the departed species. You found the comb in rubble near Pompeii, a fishbone polished smooth, inscribed with the word Felix, possibly the previous owner's name. You held it dearly, tried the first stroke. It snapped. You sighed. Even relics can't handle today's rat fur. So you chose to never forget. Back in the north of Rome, there was a workshop named Domitianus. They made cloaks from carefully brushed rat hide. Rumours said they sprinkled bread oven ash onto the hides to soak up oils and loosen the fur. It worked so well that once, some Roman soldiers mistook it for helmet wipes and walked around smelling like burnt loaves. You gave it a try, scattering ash with care, but you used the wrong kind, from a pottery kiln. Result, the fur stiffened like razor blades. You stashed that batch away in a corner, labelled, for enemies only. Another time, you used beeswax to soften the fur before brushing, an old trick from Campania. They said the wax would make the fur shine like a wet cat's back. You believed. You smeared it evenly, like butter on bread. And yes, the hide softened, but the smell was haunted beehive levels of wrong. Within the hour, 3 cats, 1 child, and even your master noticed. You hung a sign, soft skin, not honey, don't lick. You once heard of a merchant at the Aventine market. He sold rat hides claiming they were blessed by Mercury. Customers bought it in droves, until one noble family's wedding guest broke into allergic fits, and the truth came out. He brushed the hides himself, then sprayed them with wine for divine effect. You looked at your hide, sighed. No gods backing up this fur. Then you found some patches where the fur grew back. No joke. Fur growing on dried, tanned hide. Your master said, "That's cursed skin. It hasn't passed on." So you built a little altar in the corner of the workshop, lit some incense, bowed 3 times, started brushing again, this time with music, gently, strand by strand, as if you were coaxing a little rat soul into reincarnation. Some nights, you dream of rats sitting up, speaking human words. "Sorry about the fur, but I'm cold." You wake up soaked in sweat. Next time, you're more careful, not shaving everything, leaving a few tufts at the edges as an apology, as a memory that shouldn't be wiped clean. At a small fair in the Roman Forum, someone once shouted, "Rat hides with original fur, preserving the whispers of the past." You stood afar, watched those hides sell out. Buyers cradled them like they were bringing home ancient voices. And you just kept brushing, quietly, carefully, and no longer too deep. An old tanner once said, "There are 2 things you shouldn't overdo, shaving memories and brushing rat fur." You didn't understand. but you nodded because your hands were covered in fur. You stand in the workshop. In front of you, a mountain of rat hides. Unlike wool or cloth, rat hide isn't neatly rolled up. They lie there, slumped like souls that haven't moved on. Each piece is a different size. Each piece has its own fate. And you, the lucky one who survived the past 7 chapters, now enter the ultimate rite of this trade, sorting. You sit down, pick up the first hide. From the wooden shelf above, an old scroll falls, a fragment from Pliny the Elder's natural history. In it, he writes that rat fur can cure toothaches if wrapped in a hide struck by lightning. You glance sideways at the pile, thinking, which one got struck by lightning? Should I rub them with static? And just like that, you add a new category to your chart. Medicinal potential hide, pending static comb test. Soft as a dream, smooth as the forehead of a Roman baby not plagued by malaria. That one you set aside. Label, neck hide for noble women's collars. Second piece, slightly stiff with claw marks. Probably a battle-scarred rat. You note, warrior hide, good for young soldier boots. Third piece, a long scar runs across it. You pause, tilt your head, then sigh. Hide that once loved, ideal for a broken heart wallet. Sorting isn't just a skill, it's reverse astrology. You read cut marks to guess the rat's mood at death. You sniff the edge of the hide to tell if it lived in a public kitchen or a library cellar. You even bite a corner to assess stretchiness by the master's rule. If 3 chews don't hurt your teeth, it's well tanned. Occasionally, you find a hide with markings, a letter, a swirl, a bite imprint. You're not sure who left them. Rumour says, suburban sorcerers use rats for charms. Those hides should be burned. You're not superstitious, but you're not stupid either. Still, you remember last year's fiasco at Aventine Market. A rat hide dealer got fined for mixing in baby snake hides, passing them off as elite warrior rats. When it rained, the slippery snake hides made the guards slip during a march. Since then, every workshop tests hides with sunlight and scent. You bundle those suspicious hides, stuff them in a separate drawer. Note, for depressed priest orders only. You once tried sorting by colour, dark brown, pale grey, glossy black. But then you realised, after a damp Roman winter, all colours faded into what's now called imperial mud brown. A visiting doctor once took a sample, said he'd use it in his manual pathological shades by season. Sorting comes with size. Each time you stack a pile, you feel like you're building a rodent cemetery. No tears, but there's a smell. No candles, but there's dust. No farewells, but there's a tag that reads, waistband cut, premium, sweat sensitive. The master walks by, eyes the hides, nods. Well done. Today you pass the subject of empathetic tailoring. You're not sure you want to keep studying, but you know these hides will become scented silver pouches, or helmet linings for soldiers, or knife handles for royal chefs. You smooth out one final piece, tiny, probably a baby rat. You write the label, do not use, sample only, then place it on the table, as if preserving something intact in a world made of fragments. A good tailor doesn't just cut, they preserve what no one notices. An old quote, faded on the workshop wall. You read it again, nod, then go back to sorting, quietly, but not without meaning. You thought this chapter would be gentle. No, this is where the needle doesn't just pierce the hide, but pierces your very heart, slow, steady, silent, like a therapy session, without insurance. Sewing needles in ancient Rome were made from bone, goat bone, dog bone, human bone. If you lived in the smuggling regions of the south, thread, no nylon. Sewing thread was dried rat tendon, stretched and left to cure. Just the smell is enough to remind you of a lunch you've since forgotten. You begin, the first stitch, through a piece of hide already smoothed. Your hand shakes, not from nerves, but because you just stitched your own finger with rat tendon thread. A minor accident, the needle snapped, the thread whipped, and you gritted your teeth and stitched the wound like a wartime medic. You sit there, sweating more than bleeding, and wonder, does this count as Roman healthcare? The soft crack echoes like someone sighing after breaking a wine glass at Domitian's tavern. You tilt your head, squint. Each stitch is a test of patience. Each seam a journey from one side of a broken piece to the other side of depression. You remember the workshop master's words. Sewing by hand means putting emotion into the thread. Don't tremble, the rats will know. You used to laugh at that. Now you don't. Now you sew with a reverence that feels almost religious, as if each strand of thread is an offering to the craft goddess Minerva. In the corner of the workshop, there's a blind old man. He once made boots for the 9th Hispana Legion. He can't see anymore, but still sews by, listening to the sound of thread against hide. Listen. When it hisses like a cold breath, the thread is dry, he says. You learn to close your eyes and listen, not to see, but to understand. One day, you sew for 6 hours straight. When you stand, your fingertips are calloused, but your chest feels lighter. No one knows why. Some say stitching rat hide helps wounded souls. Hold together, briefly, with tendon. Another, an old priest from the nearby temple of Mithras, once dropped by, looked at the tendon thread, and softly said, "This could mend spiritual wounds too. But remember, don't stitch too tight. Memory needs room to breathe." You sew small hides into coin pouches, longer pieces into saddle patches, and a few special ones, white, soft, pine-scented, into festival undergarments for suburban dancers. A few times, you even stitch tiny charms inside, scraps of rat hide with Etruscan runes drawn in charcoal. No one asks what they do, only that the dancers who wore those garments never slipped while dancing. People say rat hide balances the soul. There was a strange customer once. An old nobleman ordered a rat hide pillow for his dog. He requested the stitching follow the shape of a crescent moon, believing dogs dream less loudly if they see the moon. You did exactly that. The dog slept soundly. The nobleman tipped you 3 denarii. You once thought about quitting. On your 100th stitch of the day, you thought, "I'm living a life stitched together from the remains of creatures no one loved." That thought echoed like a whisper from the walls of the Domus Aurea. Once gilded, now just rubble. You felt like Nero's tailor, not the emperor, but the twilight of forgotten things. But then a poor girl came, bought a rice pouch you had sewn from rat hide. She said, "It's light, it's warm, and It's the only thing I own." You said nothing, just went back to sewing. Sewing is how humans speak to silence. Another phrase, written in charcoal on the ceiling of the workshop. You read it and felt, not invisible. Delivery sounds like the easiest part of the entire job involving rat carcasses. No, this is the part where you're most likely to get yelled at. You could have done everything else perfectly. Skin without tearing, sew every edge of biological fabric neatly, dry down to every tendon strand, brush the fur smooth as a royal cat's tail. But if you deliver to the wrong house, or the right house with the wrong smell, you could still get beaten with a sheep bone. Packages are usually wrapped in burlap or wooden boxes. Depends on the client. Nobles get engraved patterns, commoners get vinegar-soaked cloth to mask the smell. You walk from the workshop to delivery points all over Rome, from the grammar teacher's house in Aventine to the tavern under the arena. Each place is a test for both your lungs and legs. Roman couriers weren't just delivery people. They were silent storytellers, because every knock on a door had to come with just the right words, the proper bow, and never answering when the client asked, "Does it still smell?" Among them was Gaius, a 16-year-old slave boy, famous for being the fastest courier in the Capena market. People said he once ran 5 miles in the rain to deliver rat-skin gloves to a magistrate's wife before her. Asthma attack hit, and Lucilla, a woman posing as a man, specialized in delivering to military districts where women got catcalled like hot bread. She tied her hair, wore an old soldier's tunic, and only ever said, "Delivery, done, leaving." No one dared stop her. One time, you delivered rat-skin underwear to a suburban dancer and saw her practicing with a sword balanced on her head. You tried to back away, but she said, "Just toss it through the door. If it doesn't hit my face, it's fate." You tossed, hit her hand. She nodded. Order complete. Sometimes the goods didn't reach people, but landed at a military checkpoint where soldiers inspected every strip of hide like rebels on trial. "This one could hide darts," said one, sniffed a piece, then sneezed. You had to buy wine for the whole squad before they let the package through. Another day, you ran into a blind beggar at the Sabura market. He held out a hand and asked what was in the bag. You gave him a leftover scrap of rat hide. He touched it, smiled, and said, "Soft leather. The maker must be decent." You were so surprised, you forgot the smell. One of the biggest challenges was delivering to the villas of politicians, where house stewards inspected packages more rigorously than the French check borders. You brought rat-skin bags, stood in the exact sunbeam you were instructed. The steward came out, put on gloves, sprayed vinegar on the bundle before opening it. He flipped each layer, sniffed, then muttered something unintelligible in Etruscan. If he nodded, you got paid. If not, the order was returned. One day you delivered to Brutus's villa. Yes, that Brutus. The Caesar statue in the garden had no nose. No one knew why. You dropped off the goods, turned to leave, and heard a raven caw 3 times. No one dares explain it. On special occasions, like Saturnalia or weddings of wealthy families, orders spiked. One day, you had to deliver 37 rat-skin glove pouches to the Scribonius estate, a politician who liked to wear rat fur lining to keep in the yin. You hired a small ox cart to carry the goods, And since horses were expensive, you had to use an old donkey named Cicero. He was slow, but knew when to stop, especially near guards. One time he stopped by a fig tree, sneezed right on cue, helping you spot soldiers checking goods behind the bushes. Cicero became your travel buddy. You trusted him more than any new slave. In the storage room, they hang a wooden board engraved in Latin. Felix est qui non redidit. Lucky is the one who isn't returned. You glance at it every time before heading out, and every time you deliver successfully, you feel lighter, like you just laid down a piece of history, still covered in a bit of fur. You have no signboard, no license, no patron deity. But every morning, when the smell of dried rat hide still lingers beneath your nails, you're an essential cog in the miserable wheel called empire. The rat fur stitcher doesn't appear in any historical text. Not like the poet, not like the soldier, not like the aqueduct engineer. No one writes about you, but you still sew linings for them. No one carves your name into stone, but the tack marks in your hand stay. When night falls, you don't sleep on a bed. You curl up in scraps of rejected fur, and you remember every returned order. Every noble's raised eyebrow, every time the guards ripped open your bag, suspecting a hidden blade. One time, you got injured from a slip of the blade. That scar, right across your thumb, was nothing compared to the calluses of being invisible. You tried reporting it to the magistrate. He asked, "What's your profession?" You didn't know what to say. Sewing, rat, fur. He laughed, wrote down, no clear occupation. Then one year, the Sabura market caught fire. The entire leather, wood, and tent district sank into flames. People panicked, shouting, grabbing their goods, running up the Aventine Hill in chaos. You had nothing to save, except your needle pouch and a broken wooden stool. But someone called out to you. A firefighter in scorched black armor shoved a singed cloth bag into your hands. "Sew this. My gloves are torn." You did it right there, under the firelight, among the cracking sounds of burning wood. That night, the gloves you stitched, not beautiful, not fragrant, saved a pair of hands. People call you filthy. Kids throw dirt at you. Even the neighborhood cats don't bother rubbing your legs. But one day, yes, just one, you delivered an order to an old woman in Esquilin. She held the rat skin, looked at the stitching, gently touched the soft fur. She whispered, "My son used to sew like this before he went off to war." You didn't say a word. You bowed. And for the first time that year, you didn't hate the smell of rat. History doesn't name you, but history once sat on a chair you made, wore gloves you stitched, and slept on the back of a rat you skinned. That's the quietest kind of recognition, and sometimes it's the only kind you get. No one knows your name, but the hat you stitched does. It's called Pileus mus piliferus, Roman rat fur hat. An item passed from a guard's hand to a warehouse clerk's finger to a minor official's head, and somehow slipped into the palace. On busy days in Sabura, there were strange men wandering through the tents and taverns, asking about a hat touched by the gods. They didn't wear armor, but the way they inspected the stitching, flipped the lining inside out to sniff. You knew instantly they were from the upper world. You didn't follow the hat in. You stayed in your Sabura alley, where dead rats outnumbered morning greetings. But one day, Someone came looking for you. No soldier's coat, no boots, just a piece of silk cloth and an invitation. The governor wishes to meet the one who made that hat. You thought it was a joke, but next thing you knew, you were standing at the gate of the Palatium, palace on the hill, feet still muddy, fingernails still black. They didn't ask your name. Just held the hat, flipped the lining, ran their fingers along the stitches. An old official looked at you and softly said, "Grey rat fur, hidden seams, no edge exposed, beautiful." You nodded like a machine. "He won't wear it," the man said, "but he'll keep it on his desk." When the hat was placed on the desk, some servants whispered, "What fur is that? Rabbit?" Then an old maid sighed, "Rat fur. I've seen this before in Sabura, the year my husband was still alive." A brief silence passed through the room, filled with the scent of cinnamon and perfume. Just 1 second, but enough to make the rat hat something real. You weren't paid, weren't honored, no patent. But that day, on your way home, you bought a loaf of bread softer than usual, and when you bit into the first piece, the rat smell felt fainter, almost like pride, not because you were known, but because something you made survived all the way to the highest tier of a world that was never meant for you. That was the first, and also the last time the hat was mentioned. History didn't write it down. Museums didn't display it. Archaeologists only found a frayed scrap of cloth with faded strands of fur. But for you, it's the only proof that you once laid your hand on history. Have you ever thought that a rat fur hat could keep a man's head warm, but not his memory? That hat once touched the governor's hand, once sat beside a red seal, next to an unsent letter and an ink pot made of Egyptian shards. Once was cleaned with lavender oil, but no one wrote it down. No one carved it into stone. No one built a statue of a rat looking up. On nights when the wind whips from the Tiber, you still sit curled up in Sabura. Wobbly stool, cloak patched in 7 places. Only your rat fur gloves are new, made by your own hand from leftover scraps. Your fingers aren't cold, but your heart is. You once thought you'd get used to it, that making something useful, even from a dead rat, was a kind of existence, a trace in the rushing river of life. Then you heard the news. A new blacksmith had his name etched on a golden board for forging a dagger with a jade hilt. A dancer got a statue in a nobleman's garden for making him laugh. A poet just died and had an entire memorial reading. And you still have your pile of rat fur and calloused hands. You chuckled, a quiet kind of laugh, with no sound, because you knew rat fur warmth only keeps the body warm, not the name. You once warmed a magistrate's head, but you couldn't warm the page of history. That night, you burned an old prototype, a faulty hat, crooked stitching. It burned fast, smelled like singed hair mixed with animal skin, choking and haunting. You thought it would lift your spirits, but it didn't. You just saw a streak of smoke in the air, then it vanished, like you. Tomorrow, you'll still wake early, still go to the market for rats, still boil, skin, comb, stitch. But this time, you start saving a tiny piece from each product, a scrap of fur, a thread, a small sewn shape. You wrap them up, not for sale, just to remember. Not so that history remembers you, but so you remember that. There are warmths that will never be named, but still exist. Yes, many ups and downs, Do you think you could survive in Rome's underground empire again? Let me know in the comments below, or tell me where we should go next. Your suggestion could become a future Deblocked episode. Curious whether you could survive in ancient Egypt, Greece. Check out this video. There were a lot of diseases and other dangers people had to face. Oddly enough, many of those dangers came from something that, in a lot of ways, allowed life to flourish. As always, my name is Blocko. This has been Life Noggin. Don't forget to keep on thinking. Roman aqueduct system aqueducts, or water bridges, were systems for transporting and supplying water. In ancient times, people used structures like bridges or elevated viaducts to move water across distances through the air, usually across a valley. In modern times, we use pipelines, channels, ditches, and tunnels for this purpose. Some large aqueducts were even used to transport boats. The word aqueduct comes from the Latin words aqua and ducere. Although associated with ancient Rome, few know that aqueducts had already been built much earlier, in Greece, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. Ancient Egyptians and Indians constructed complex irrigation systems. The Roman-style aqueduct had already been used around the 7th century before the Common Era, such as the limestone aqueduct of the Assyrians in Asia Minor, as long as 3 football fields, as wide as a 4-lane highway, crossing a valley to their capital. You're thirsty. But it's the year 312 before the Common Era. Nothing makes you realize what century you live in, quite like being thirsty. Today, you open the fridge, push a button, clean water, ice, maybe even carbonation, and artificial lemon flavor. But what about the year 312? You're living in ancient Rome. You're a citizen, not exactly poor, but not rich enough to have a slave just to fetch water. And you're thirsty. No faucet, no filtration plant, no plastic bottle with an embossed logo. Just 3 choices: a well, the river, or staying thirsty. You head toward the Tiber River. It flows slow, wide, and so filthy. Even stray dogs avoid it. Under the burning August sun, the surface reeks like the whole city just washed a dirty shirt in it and skipped the soap. You look at the water and turn back. You're not that thirsty. What about wells? Yes, there are some. But Rome has over 300,000 people. Each morning, women line up for hundreds of meters, hauling heavy wooden buckets back home. If you wake up late, or are simply weaker than your neighbor, you'll have to wait until afternoon. When the waters run out, the sun's gone down, and flies outnumber hope. The city's swelling. To the north is the Quirinal Hill, to the south the Aventine. Rows of homes stacked like ancient Lego blocks. Public baths popping up. Communal toilets too. But water doesn't multiply. Rome is thirsty. And not just the thirst of individuals, but of an empire about to expand, unsure what to drink. In Senate meetings, in letters sent from the battlefield, even in tragic poetry, the phrase clean water starts to appear as often as victory, because the Romans had conquered vast lands, but they hadn't yet conquered water. And then, someone decided to do what the city only dared to dream. Rome wasn't just thirsty for water, it was thirsty for control. The empire was growing too fast, and every victory added more infrastructure burden. The population surged after the Samnite Wars. Bathhouses needed filling, communal toilets needed rinsing, temples needed maintenance. Water suddenly became political capital, Whoever controlled water controlled the city. In that context, the name Appius Claudius Caecus rose, not as a poet, not as a general, but as a politician who understood building an aqueduct wasn't just engineering, it was power. His name was Appius Claudius Caecus, an ambitious, cold, and dry man, in the most literal sense. He didn't write poetry. He didn't build temples. He didn't hand out coins. He built an aqueduct. The idea sounded insane. Bring water from a spring dozens of miles away, through hills, through mountains, into the city, using stone. No pumps, no engines, no miracles. Just gravity and math. People laughed, and he began. He hired nameless engineers. He had slaves cut stone. He mobilized prisoners of war to work in darkness, where the only light was a dream of a day without thirst. Construction sites appeared on the city's edge. No signs, no ceremonies, just rock dust, pickaxes hitting walls, and people slowly vanishing into the earth. Roman engineers, no laser levels, no CAD software, only strings with lead weight to measure slope, off by a single degree, and the water would stop, as if sulking. Sometimes entire sections had to be dismantled to fix errors. Sometimes they hit clay, and water burst up, collapsing the tunnel. Below, sweat mixed with dust. Above, no one knew a water vein was slowly being opened, like an artificial artery forming. And so, the Aqua Appia was born, Rome's first aqueduct. It ran underground for nearly 16 kilometers. No one could see it from the surface. No statue, no grand opening. Just a small stream, cold, clean, persistent, flowing into Rome. Soon after, people started to notice. Public fountains had a steadier flow. Bathhouses didn't have to close for lack of water. And children could splash around without being scolded. They didn't know exactly where it came from, just that now. Rome didn't have to be thirsty anymore, but they didn't yet know. That was just the first drop of a coming flood of engineering that would change the world. Because once Rome learned how to move water, they also learned how to control nature and control history. No one controls a city if they can't control its flow. Aqua Appia was just the beginning, and like everything in Rome, if something works, it will be expanded to the extreme. No one remembers the exact moment when Rome realized it could bend water as if commanding an army. They only knew that after Aqua Appia, water began to flow from farther away, higher up, more complex, and more ambitious. You can picture a scene like this: a spring on a hill 60 kilometers away. A group of engineers standing in an empty field, placing stakes, measuring slope using sunlight and a plumb bob. No satellite maps, no GPS, no AutoCAD. Just one principle: water flows downhill. They turned that simple principle into one of the greatest hydraulic systems of the ancient world. The names of new aqueducts began to appear. Annio Vetus, in the year 272 before Rome's new age, brought water from the Annio spring, passing cliffs and water bridges towering above homes. Aqua Marcia, over 90 kilometers long, called the water of the aristocrats because it was so clean and cold it could chill wine. This kind of water was once chosen exclusively for the elite's luxurious banquets. Some records mention that at noble villas, Aqua Marcia taps were placed right next to dining tables, not only to chill wine, but also to show off status. Many historians call it the Evian of the ancient world, where every drop of water wasn't just water, but a silent declaration of power and taste. Aqua Claudia, majestic like a crown of stone, curved across the sky for more than 15 kilometers before touching the city. And others, Aqua Tepula, Aqua Virgo, Aqua Alexandrina. Each name a chapter of history, each flow a statement. We don't need to live near water, we bring water to us. The Romans did what no other civilization dared. They redesigned the way water existed in human life. Not just for drinking, not just for bathing, but to redefine the concept of convenience in a world where most people still scooped water from rivers by hand. So how did they do it? They used 3 simple tools: stone, gravity, and an almost blind faith in engineering. They built hundreds of water bridges, as tall as bell towers. They dug through hills, carved mountains, built tunnels over 30 kilometers long. They lined pipes with lead, with clay, hand-drew maps, and marked every meter of slope with blood and sweat. A single aqueduct could be 80 kilometers long, with a slope of only 1 to 3 parts per thousand. Slightly off, the water would stagnate. Slightly higher, the pressure would burst the pipes. And so, for centuries, Romans walked across the Apennines just to make water flow beautifully. In Rome, water began to appear like a family member. At public fountains, children lined up, played, poured water into leather bags. At the baths, men, women, slaves, nobles, all shared hot tubs as a form of socialization. At temples, sacred streams were routed directly through aqueducts into rituals. Water became ritual, became power, and of course, became a weapon. There were summers when aqueducts were cut off in rebellious neighborhoods as a way to choke a community. There were elections where politicians promised to build more water taps and won votes like handing out free ice cream. There were wars where aqueducts were destroyed and the citizens of Rome thirsted as if nothing had ever existed. Rome understood clearly, water wasn't a gift from the gods. It was a product of labor and the foundation of social order. By the end of the 1st century, Rome's aqueduct system reached its peak. 11 major lines, over 500 miles, nearly 800 kilometers, supplying 300 million gallons of water per day, enough to nourish 1 million people, and the immortal dream of an empire. But the amazing thing is, you could walk past an aqueduct and not notice. It didn't show off. It didn't gush like a fountain. It just stood there, silent and flowed. And you can't help but think, can a civilization truly be great if it hasn't yet learned how to make water move through stone? Jupiter rules the sky, but the aqueduct rules every drop of water. If you think the Roman aqueduct system is just streams of water rushing over dramatic stone bridges like in the movies, well, you're partly right. But most of the time, water in the aqueduct wasn't seen at all. It was silent, it was winding, and it lived underground more than it did on the surface. The Romans didn't just know how to bring water from high to low. They turned gravity, something every ancient civilization saw as a limitation, into their greatest ally. And to do that, they had to negotiate, not with the gods, but with time. Because there were no electric pumps, no hydraulic engines, no miracles, just numbers, tiny slopes, and years of digging by hand. For example, Aqua Claudia, one of the most grand aqueduct lines, nearly 70 kilometers long. For the first 55 kilometers, you wouldn't see it at all. It ran underground. On the surface, only fields, little hills, and a few sleepy goats. Only near the city did it rise, higher and higher, like a stone dragon gliding through the sky. And the simple reason? To maintain just the right slope. Not too steep to break the structure. Not too flat to stop the flow. Everything had to be accurate to the thousandth. Imagine this. A slope of 1 in 1,000 means the water drops just 1 meter over 1 kilometer. With a 60-kilometer aqueduct, an error of just 2 or 3 meters could turn the entire stream into a puddle. No GPS, no laser levels, just a string, a plumb bob. And time. Lots and lots of time. Or a 6-meter wooden beam with a water level in the middle, called a chorobates. This special tool, which looked like a short bench, was the Roman engineers' secret weapon. They placed it on the ground, poured water into the groove, waited for it to settle, then adjusted each wooden leg until it was level. A skilled engineer could detect a deviation of just a few millimeters per kilometer. With their eyes and patience. No one clapped for them, but if the water didn't flow, the whole city would know their name. And time was also their greatest enemy. Stones cracked, lime wore down, pipes built up residue, tree roots crawled into the channels. There were even times when the water came out orange due to iron from the lead pipes, and people thought it was a sign of a curse. So the Romans didn't just build a water system, they built a maintenance system. There was a team that scraped lime deposits, called the Castellani, a team that checked the slope with wooden rods, walking every section. There were notebooks, recording every leaking spout, every damaged segment, every repair. You think property deeds are modern. Ancient Rome had records, tracking the water lines of every household. Gravity was free, but to keep it working properly, Rome had to pay, with organized patience. One time, in the 1st century, a 12-kilometer aqueduct section collapsed due to a landslide near Tivoli. Hundreds of workers were mobilized. No excavators, no electric lights, only torches, bare hands, and 3 years of digging the entire tunnel again. Because of events like that, an aqueduct was never just a water pipe. It was a memory, buried in the earth. And did you know, even Roman writers, like Frontinus, once compared aqueducts to poetry. But Frontinus wasn't just a writer. He was the water commissioner of Rome under Emperor Nerva. In the year 97, he wrote De Aquis Urbis Romae, the first technical document covering Rome's entire water system. In it, he detailed each channel, slope, reservoir position, and even which households were stealing water. Frontinus was strict with nobles who secretly tapped into the aqueduct, calling them thieves beneath the toga. He emphasized, water is life, and whoever controls the water controls Rome. He wrote, every drop of water is a syllable, every flow is a line of verse, and each aqueduct is a silent poem, only heard through feeling. Gravity, the thing we can't see, carried water far, but time, the thing we can't stop, turned every tiny error into a disaster or a miracle. If gravity is the natural enemy of all construction, then the Romans turned stone into an ally. Imagine yourself standing beneath a stone bridge nearly 300 meters long over 30 meters high in the middle of a lush green valley. No steel reinforcement, no modern cement, just massive stone blocks stacked atop one another. Yet thousands of years later, it still stands. No cracks, no collapse, and still carrying water as if it has never known old age. That is the strange and magnificent wonder of Roman aqueducts, the stone arch. But the journey toward the stone arch didn't begin with stone. In the early days, Romans crossed rivers and valleys with wooden bridges, bamboo scaffolds, or hybrid stone and wood structures. These temporary constructions were easy to build, but prone to rot, fire, and collapse whenever it rained hard or rebels set them ablaze. Engineers from the Roman Republic once lamented about bridges that couldn't survive a single winter. And that very frustration became the motivation for the next step, to find a form that could stand firm through the centuries. Strength came from shape. The Romans understood something few ancient civilizations dared to believe. Stone could bear weight if you made it share the load. They didn't resist gravity with brute force. They resisted it with geometry. A perfectly curved arch, if built in the right proportions, would distribute all gravitational force down to the two supports at its base. No single point bore the full weight. Each stone took part of the burden and leaned on the others to stay upright. And the most important stone, the one at the top of the arch, the keystone. Without it, the entire structure would fall. But once placed correctly, it turned the arch into a unified whole, unbreakable by ordinary pressure, built without mortar, standing firm for millennia. However, the process wasn't always smooth. There were times when the keystone was misaligned by just a few centimeters, and when the wooden frame was removed too early, the entire arch collapsed like a domino field of stone. Records by Vitruvius mention one bridge collapse near Tiber that killed over 12 workers, all because a single brace was hollowed out by termites inside the centering. That's why, for Roman engineers, building a stone arch wasn't just construction. It was a nerve-wracking ritual. Every time they placed a keystone was a breath held. They weren't just resisting gravity. They were betting their honor and even the lives of the masons standing below. Most early aqueduct bridges were built with opus quadratum, squared, dry-fitted stone blocks, no cement used. The main materials were usually limestone or lightweight volcanic rock, depending on the region, transported by ox cart from quarries to the site. To build an arch, they used a curved wooden frame called centering to hold the stones in place while stacking. When the final keystone was placed at the top, the entire arch would lock, and the wooden frame was removed. The bridge stood on its own. No glue required, no gods needed. Pont de Gare, a stone symphony. The clearest example is the aqueduct bridge at Pont de Gare in southern France, built around the 1st century before the New Age. 275 meters long, 49 meters high, 3 tiers of stone arches, each tier flowing into the next like a 3-part musical harmony. This bridge didn't just carry water, it also carried light. When the sun sets, golden light slides through the curved arches, casting lines of shadow like a moving painting. It's been over 2,000 years, and no one uses water from Pont de Gare anymore. But the bridge still stands, because the Romans didn't build just to use. They built to outlast time, when engineering became political symbolism. As time went on, aqueducts weren't just for transporting water. They were declarations of power. Each bridge was an answer. This is Roman land. Wherever there is water, there is civilization. Even in far-off regions like Spain, Rome built grand aqueducts, partly to quench thirst, partly to stake a territorial claim. No fortress walls needed, just a stone arch, because water may flow away, but stone does not. A drop of water flowing into Rome wasn't just for drinking. It lived its own life and died like a citizen. Once the flow begins, it's not just water. It's a complex system stretching from distant mountain springs to the heart of the city. Among the dozens of aqueducts the Romans built, a few stood out not only for their length, but for their unique roles. Aqua Marcia, nearly 91 kilometers long, with the coldest and cleanest water, mainly serving the aristocracy and elite bathhouses. Aqua Claudia, the tallest and most massive, with many two-tiered stone arches supplying the Palatine Hill, where the imperial palace stood. Aqua Virgo, famous because it's still in use today in Rome, leading to the Trevi Fountain, built in the year 19 before the New Age by Agrippa. Each aqueduct had its own maintenance schedule, its own engineers, and its own story. The flow was physical, but the network was social. Every aqueduct began at a very quiet place, the source spring. Romans believed that clean water came from natural flows protected by deities, called Castellum Aquae. There the water was collected, pre-filtered, and began its journey of dozens of miles into the city. Some famous sources, like Aqua Marcia, drew from the Anio Mountains, where the water ran year-round, cold, clear, and full of minerals. Romans believed every drop was a gift from nature, and they had a duty to distribute it, like collecting and handing out taxes. Water enters the city, splits into 3 streams. Even before water entered the city, a portion was reserved for religious rituals. At major temples like the Temple of Vesta, only water drawn from pure aqueducts was allowed, usually those flowing directly from springs without passing through reservoirs. Priests would wash their hands, perform purification rites, and sometimes sprinkle water on the altar at dawn, a time believed to be untainted by human contact. Choosing which aqueduct to supply a temple was sometimes based on bird omens or the prophecies of the Sibyl, meaning water held not only practical but sacred, legal, political significance. When water reached Rome, it didn't pour straight into the emperor's shower like in modern movies. Instead, it was directed into a large tank called Castellum Divisorium, a central distribution station. Here, the water was divided into 3 main channels. The first, for temples and public structures like arenas, baths, and forums. The second, for private homes, but only those who paid taxes and applied for permits. The third, reserved for firefighting, poured into underground tanks, wells, and cisterns. This made the entire city like a circulatory system, where every drop of water had a clear duty, tracked, measured, and sometimes stolen. Lead pipes, clay tubes, and fraud. From the distribution tank, water flowed through pipes called fistulae, typically made of lead, terracotta, or hollowed-out stone. Each home was connected to an official water spout, and the water volume was measured by the diameter of the pipe opening, called a calyx. However, that wasn't the end of the story. Many aristocratic families hired workers to secretly drill extra pipes, hidden underground or behind walls, to draw more water than their quota allowed. Frontinus called these people water thieves in togas, and since water was a public resource, water fraud was considered a crime, punishable by fines, property confiscation, or bans on new construction. Bathwater, irrigation, and death water. Not all water drops were treated equally. Clean water used for drinking and cooking was kept separate. Excess bath water would flow into public gutters, used to wash streets, water plants, cool floors, or pour into sewers. At large bathhouses like the baths of Caracalla, nearly 10,000 cubic meters of water were used daily, circulating continuously through cold, warm, and hot pools, then drained through pipes into disposal channels. Still, not all wastewater was wasted. Some residential areas reused bathwater to irrigate vegetables or wash livestock pens, turning water into a life cycle resource, a city that lived by water. If Rome were a living organism, water was its blood. It nourished every household, cleaned every arena, cooled every paving stone. And unlike other empires that used water just to survive, Rome used water to define civilization. Aqueducts weren't just engineering, they were ecosystems. Every drop of water didn't just flow, it worked, it served, it died, in an orderly fashion. And that's what made the difference. In a thirsty world, Rome didn't just have water, they had a society centered around water. An ecosystem that had no internet, yet every drop had a job. You see a water arch, a fountain spout, a stream flowing into the arena. But you don't see the one who carved the stone, who carried the mortar, who hauled each bucket under the burning sun. They have no name, but without them, there is no water. History remembers the names of Caesar, Agrippa, Frontinus, those who ordered the aqueducts built, but almost no line mentions the names of the ones who actually built them. No one knows who set the first arch of Aqua Marcia. No one remembers the child who lit oil lamps for the quarry team working through the night in the Anio hills. No tablet bears the name of the one who died placing the final stone on the Segovia Bridge. The water carriers. Among the anonymous laborers, there was a special group, Aquarii, the water carriers. They didn't build, they didn't design. They had one task, to ensure water arrived in the right place, at the right time. Every morning, Aquarii inspected the tanks, gauging pressure with eyes and ears, listening to the sound of water through pipes like doctors listening to a heartbeat. If a leak was found, they patched it with clay or inserted a temporary pipe. If a household reported water loss, they had to trace it back to the distribution tank, sometimes taking all day just to find someone had carved a hole no bigger than a finger. No one applauded them. But if the water stopped for a single day, the entire city would see their faces. Those who died in darkness, not only were there diggers, but others were assigned to perform routine maintenance on the entire underground system. They were called manutentores aquarum. They descended into deep wells, crawled into shoulder-wide tunnels, carrying an oil lamp and a stick to measure water depth. Once a month, they would travel the channels to check for erosion, pressure, and sediment buildup along stone walls. Some were trapped between arches. Others passed out from lack of oxygen upon entering a tight shaft. Records show one manutentor went missing for 3 days in a tunnel of Aqua Triana, swept away by mud into a side branch. These people had no bronze statues, no names in archives, but if they missed even one inspection, a small leak could bring down the system in 3 dry season days. Aqueducts stretching dozens of kilometers weren't just above ground. Some sections were carved deep into mountains, narrow, dark, with not enough air to light a torch. This was the job of tunnel crews, often slaves, prisoners, or poor laborers paid meager wages. They lay flat in tunnels less than 1 meter high, chiseling the rock inch by inch. They hauled out baskets of earth, handfuls of stone, and even skeletons buried from distant ages. Many died from suffocation, collapse, or swamp fevers. But there were no gravestones. The tunnel was continued by another. The water kept flowing. Their names did not. The pressure keeper. In some temples, especially that of Vesta or royal baths, there was a special post called Custos Aquae, the water pressure supervisor. He didn't wear a toga. He carried a bronze measuring rod, and sometimes a very sharp ear. He listened for leaks. He smelled damp stones to detect backflow. He dipped his hand in the stream to sense strange temperatures. If he detected pressure shifts, he had authority to close valves, even to shut down an entire bathhouse. Seneca once recorded, "A Custos Aquae saved an entire district by detecting an abnormal flow." It turned out to be a massive water theft that could have collapsed the aqueduct line. No statue was carved for him, but he saved thousands of lives each day. The silent keepers, not only men, women and children were part of the water system in its quietest corners. In poor districts like Transtiberim or the Aventine outskirts, many women earned a living carrying water from public tanks to rented homes for the elderly or ill. Children, especially young girls, were often assigned to guard the water, meaning they sat by public fountains for hours, holding a spot, preventing crowding. Some served as messengers, running across the city to report leaks or low pressure. An archaeological note once recorded a wall carving in a small Pompeii bathhouse showing an old woman carrying 2 buckets with the caption, "She fetched water before the sun rose." No one knows her name, but in those bare feet was a whole city kept warm, a child washed clean, a little tavern with water for morning porridge. The inspectors, the tunnelers, the carriers, they lived inside the aqueduct, but outside of history, no folk song praised them, no marble engraving honored them, but they still lived, still died. Still sat by the mountain spring every morning to check water levels in the biting cold of the highlands. And every time we see water flow through the Trevi fountain, the arena, the ancient ruins, we are witnessing the work of those without names. Where there is water, there is power, and where there is power, corruption is never far. Rome didn't just build aqueducts to supply water. They built a system of power. Not everyone had water flowing into their home. Not every water pipe came from a legal source. And not every water inspector did their job honestly. Water is a privilege in Rome. Only registered homes were allowed to receive water directly from the aqueduct. But that permit wasn't free. Citizens had to submit an application to the curator aquarum, the water official, and wait for approval. But in reality, without a gift, your form would be, lost in the bureaucratic current. Historian Frontinus once wrote that some rural villas suddenly had streams flowing like rivers, while whole neighborhoods next door had to haul every bucket. Whoever paid had water. Whoever stayed silent stayed dry. Illegal spouts. Before we talk about stolen taps, we must first mention the man who tried to seal every leak, Sextus Julius Frontinus. As curator aquarum under Emperor Nerva, Frontinus was the first to conduct a large-scale inspection of Rome's entire aqueduct system in the year 97. He remeasured the length of each conduit, recorded the number of legal outlets, drew a water distribution map of the city, and uncovered hundreds of water theft cases through hidden boreholes, oversized taps disguised as smaller ones, or completely unlicensed connections. Frontinus ordered all illegal branches cut off, fired many aquarii who abetted the theft, and proposed a routine inspection system, something unprecedented at the time. He wrote in his famous report, "It is not water that is lacking, but honesty." Still, the illegal taps continued to exist because profit always flowed stronger than regulations. One of the most common forms of corruption, drilling into the main pipe. The rich would hire workers to secretly dig under their floors, bore a small hole into the stone pipe, and install a hidden tap inside the wall. Since it bypassed the distribution office, they paid no taxes, yet used the water to irrigate gardens, wash chariots, or fill private pools. When caught, the punishment was to dismantle the entire pipe system. But with money, many cases were overlooked. There were even black markets for clean water, where rogue aquarii sold water drawn from public tanks to private bathhouses at outrageous prices. Officials and invisible faucets. Even the curator aquarum, considered the national water inspector, was not immune. Some records claimed that officials' houses had water flow 3 times stronger than the legal limit. Perhaps they received fountain donations from wealthy villas and granted them extra water. Others accepted bribes to divert water from temples to private estates. One major scandal was recorded during Domitian's reign, when an entire eastern district of Capitoline had no water for 3 weeks, because a side aqueduct had been secretly rerouted into a nobleman's newly built resort. When water becomes power, whoever controls the water controls the city. Because without water, there are no baths. Without baths, no markets. Without markets, no Rome. There were people who didn't need politics, didn't need armies. They just needed to control the flow. And sometimes, a single water shut-off order was enough to force a powerful family to surrender. No trial, no public condemnation, just a removal from the water distribution list, and everything fell apart. Under Nero, there was even a form of punishment by water cut-off, with no paperwork, no notice. But the consequences were as clear as torture. Bathhouses closed, servants left. Homeowners had to buy black market water at triple price, and neighbors sighed as if you had died. A single block stream was a status stripped away. In a civilization built on stone, power flowed silently through the pipes. Whoever controls the water controls the city, because without water there are no baths. Without baths, no markets. Without markets, no Rome. There were people who didn't need politics, didn't need armies. They just needed to control the flow. And sometimes, a single water shut-off order was enough to force a powerful family to surrender. In a civilization built on stone, power flowed silently through the pipes. Water doesn't just quench thirst, it says who you are and where you belong. In ancient Rome, every water route told a story, not just a story of engineering, but a story of power, culture, and identity. When an aqueduct was built, it wasn't merely a pipeline, it was a declaration, in stone and arch, asserting, we can conquer nature, bring water from the mountains to the city, because we are Rome. It's no coincidence that Roman fountains were often placed in the center of forums, where markets, debates, and trials took place. There, water became the soundtrack of society. The sound of water trickling through the square didn't just cool the people. It symbolized stability in civilization. If the water stopped flowing, it meant something was broken in the machinery of the empire. Each aqueduct stretched for tens of kilometers, crossing forests, mountains, and valleys, not only to supply water, but to draw an invisible line. From this point on, this land belongs to Rome. When Roman troops conquered new territory, they often built aqueducts alongside their camps as a symbol that civilization was arriving. Aqueducts were the first architecture. Baths, arenas, and markets came later. Aqueducts were not built for practicality alone. They were carved, decorated, and signed. The names of emperors, governors, or sponsors were etched into their columns. Each stone didn't just carry water, it carried reputation. The famous inscription on Aqua Claudia, by the hand of Claudius, water flows here from the heart of the mountain, as the empire's will reaches far. Not everyone could read Latin, not everyone went to school, but everyone understood what a cool fountain in the summer heat meant. It said that there was order, that someone was taking care, that power was quietly at work. From slaves to nobles, all bowed to drink from the same stream. It didn't erase hierarchy, but for a moment, everyone was thirsty together. And in that moment, Rome didn't declare itself with a sword, but with a single drop of cold water landing on a weary brow. A city only reveals its true nature when the water stops flowing. No flood needed, no earthquake, just a single day without water, and all of Rome would shake. No baths, no cooking, no street cleaning, no rituals. No sound of water trickling through fountains in the square, only sun-scorched air and grumpy voices. There were droughts, or quakes that toppled parts of aqueducts, and all of Rome would be thrown into disarray. People rushed to public basins, crowding, shoving for every drop. Slaves were sent out before dawn to hold places in line, but not everyone had the strength to wait their turn. Bathhouses shut down, street food stalls ran out of morning porridge, taverns switched the menu to dry wine. In a letter from the time of Claudius, one line read, "Day 3 without water, the guards are fighting over the ladle. When old aqueducts stopped working, no one dismantled them. They became shadows in the fields, or the backdrop for small markets. Children climbed the stone arches to play hide and seek. The elderly sat in their shade, telling stories of when the water still flowed. An empire doesn't only fall to war. Sometimes it's because no one had the strength to patch a pipe. Centuries later, during revival efforts, many aqueduct routes were reopened under popes or Italian kings. Not all, but some drops returned. People filled the streets. Fountains began to flow again. Water moving through stone felt like a voice calling from memory. A child looked up at the arches and asked, "Why did they build it so high?" No one answered, but everyone felt something. Cool again, inside. And that was enough, because in every Roman drop of water, there is always a trace of memory and a hint of coming back to life. There are things we think have washed away, but they're just quietly finding their way back. Not every aqueduct has crumbled. Not every Roman drop of water has dried up. Some still flow, not loudly, not symbolically, just still flowing. In modern-day Rome, part of the water supply still runs through ancient aqueduct routes, like Aqua Virgo and Aqua Claudia. They've been reconnected, reinforced, and integrated into the modern infrastructure. The tunnels once dug by slaves are now inspected by robots, but the paths, the slopes, and the logic of the water flow remain the same as 2,000 years ago. Rome doesn't demolish the past, it channels the old water into a new life. People can trace the old aqueducts as if following an emotional map. Each stone arch, each raised channel, each jagged rock in the middle of a field is a footprint of a civilization that once believed we will never be thirsty again. Modern engineers, when designing hydraulic systems, still visit Roman ruins, not just to study engineering, but to understand vision. Even when aqueducts are no longer in use, modern Romans still speak of them with reverence. A fountain can still be a meeting place. An old water bridge can still be where a musician strums. A broken stone can still be cradled like a whisper from the ancestors. Water never dies, because it was never just matter. It is memory. It is rhythm. It is how a city, even in ruins, can still feel itself flowing. And because of that, Rome is never thirsty.